Hello everyone, in this video I will be showing you one of my games that I played against the Slav Defense, with the white pieces. So here I'm playing against an opponent from Indonesia, and this was an online game. So hopefully you get some ideas of this opening, and this was back, I don't remember when, probably like last year, last couple of years or so. But I went d4. Back then I was playing d4 a lot, and here we have a response of d5. And I tried to go for like Queen's Gambit decline, Queen's Gambit position, but my opponent goes for the Slav Defense, So Queen's Gambit decline will be here with e6 instead, but here we have the Slav, and they can go for the semi-Slav afterwards, with the triangle defense, which is very strong. But here I just went knight c3, bishop f5, and I just develop my knights. Knights first, knight develops, and then I go for my bishop f4, and trying not to like lock this right away because I want my bishop to be outside the blockage here, the obstruction of the pawn. So develops, I bring my pawn up, and now they attack me with the bishop. Here I capture the pawn, and then they take with the pawn back, and I go for this move, bishop takes b8. It's probably not the most accurate or anything like that, but here take some time. So what would you do if you were to be the black pieces? You gotta be careful here, right? If you were the black pieces in this position, what would you do? Just take some time. You can pause the video and take some time, okay? Because this is very important. If you were to be the black pieces here, if you don't make this one move that you have to make, then you can be dropping a piece. All right, so hopefully you were able to spot what my opponent spotted, which is bishop takes c3 check. Okay, let's look at this. What happens if we just capture this bishop with the queen here? Right, now we have this queen a4 check attacking the king, and there's no knight here to protect here or block the check and then defend the bishop at the same time. So whatever they do, now we just win the bishop and we will be up a minor piece. So we gotta be careful, right? And what happens also if they capture with the rook? It would be the same idea, right? Like same idea. Just capture the bishop here for free. So we need to be careful here. So I went for the capture here on the knight, and they have to capture with check first. And then I take, and then they take with the queen. What happens if they take with the rook though? Now you have a similar idea where you can give a check. They cannot really block, and you can win a pawn here on this side of the board, right? That's why they capture with the queen, so they don't drop this pawn here on a7. We always gotta be careful for these little tricks, because one pawn is a big difference, right? You can just win the game like that. So I give a check here, and my opponent just moved the king here to e7. And you may be thinking, what happens if they just block with the knight? Now I'll just capture the knight, and then the king cannot castle, and we still have the queens on the board. I can even put my knight here, very nice knight, and castle already, and they haven't even castled. So it's important to castle in this position. He didn't want to drop a piece. He still wants to keep some pieces on the board. And then just go for this move, queen to b3. The idea is to just bring my queen here. Maybe, ideas like that. Not sure. But he just tries to like manually castle in this position. If I were to give a check here though, he can just try to trade, and that's fine because queens are not on the board and the king is kind of active, I can say. So in this position, I just castle, and he's just manually castling. If I were to give a check, it doesn't do anything. He can just like try to trade or just move the king away. I centralized my knight, and then he just manually castled. So it took him like 3-something turns to castle when I just did it with one turn. So I took some time to put my pieces in like better squares, right? So I now develop my rook, my f rook, to put it here, so I can go for some sort of like pushes, like c4, maybe captures, have my rooks active, maybe start pushing some pawns forward, things like that. My opponent goes with knight e4, which also centralizes his knight, which is super nice. And here I go for this move, my idea here is that I would want to capture this knight. That's what I'm thinking right now. Although my bishop is very nice, because we can say that my bishop is super nice because it's a light square bishop, looking at the light squares, and I have my pawns on dark squares. So you can think of this as there's harmony or synergy between the pieces, right? Because you have pawns attacking the dark squares and the bishop attacking the light squares, so you're covering more spaces, more squares, right? So that's a nice one. And his bishop is probably not as good as my bishop because his pawns are in light squares, and he's a light square bishop, so the bishop is being blocked by its own pawns. So here he goes for this move. Knight d2, attacking my queen and also attacking my bishop. So I just bring my queen here to this position, attacking the knight as well. Takes, and I just keep my knight centralized here. I didn't capture with a knight. Although it would have been not too bad to then bring it here. But then they can just like push or kick my knight away, right? So here my opponent goes with, brings the knight back, you know? And I go for this move, c4, trying to just break some, the middle pawns, so I can have some nice sight, I guess, for my rook on c1. My opponent goes for this move, f6, and although, I mean, f6 tends to not be the best move because you're pushing some pawns that are in front of your king forward. And I have a nice move. Maybe I can just bring my knight out or something, or back or something, but I go for this move, c takes d5. And you may be thinking, wait, what? They can just capture your knight. Yes, but because I captured this pawn on d5, temporarily, this knight is not defended, right? Remember the pawn was here? Now, if they take my knight, I can just take this knight. And if they take this other one, I can just capture with check and then capture here or something. I have maybe some ideas like that. I'm not sure yet. But they capture first, and now I'll just move my knight. My opponent centralizes queen. I try to trade his knight because here if he doesn't do anything, if he just makes like a pawn move or something, I can just capture the knight, takes, and I would just win a pawn in the end, right? So here my opponent goes for this move, f5, because now if I were to capture, he can just try to capture here with the f-pawn or something. Now the my f-pawn can be targeted easily with the rooks or something, you know. We gotta be careful. So here, first of all, I make a little like loft or something for the king, little escape route, you know, open the window for the king so he can just run away whenever, you know, prevent any background checkmates or something. The queen gets more to that area, I guess, to g6, and I just bring my knight here. He didn't take my knight, and it's nice, right? Because he doesn't want to take my knight, because I can just capture, and at one point I can just try to target this d5 pawn, right? So sometimes we don't know what our plan should be. So the easiest thing to think about would be look at your opponent's pieces and what are the pieces that are weak, you know? What's the weakest pawn in my opponent's position right now? It would be the d5 pawn, right? I mean, you can say the b7 pawn, but then if you target this pawn, they can just push it forward, right? And then this one will be also the weak one. So you would have like the a7 and d5 weak, but this one is very isolated. So this is a pawn island, and that tends to be very easy to target, right? You can bring the rooks here at one point. I mean, the knight's here. You don't want to bring it right now, right? But you can like always bring rooks here. If you push your pawn forward all the way, you can bring your other rook here and maybe target it with the queen too and have more pieces of targeting one pawn. So that could be a plan that you can develop, right? But here, after my opponent went queen g6, I went with knight f3. So you didn't capture me. Okay, I'll bring my knight back to the square that it was. And that's the thing about pawns. My opponent pushed the pawn, it was on f6, and they just pushed it to f5. And now I can just go back and then go for this outpost here on e5. And that's my plan. So he tries to, you know, put the rook in the open file, and I just bring my knight here. Here, if anything, he can just capture, but I take and I'm controlling the file. That's why my opponent is not capturing. In this position, my opponent just moved the queen here to h6. Maybe some ideas are to bring here the queen to h3, targeting this f2 pawn or something. But in this position, I go for this move. Queen b3, okay? And the idea of this is that I'm looking at the d5 pawn, but mainly I'm looking at the undefended b7 pawn, right? And it's a little bit tricky to defend that. You can try to maybe bring the queen here to a6 or something, right? But the problem with that is like if you try to defend it with like the queen here to a6, now I can just capture this rook. And if the rook takes, I can just capture this pawn, right? So it's tricky to defend that pawn, the b7 pawn, right? You cannot defend it with any of the rooks because I can just capture the rooks. So my opponent here went with the move pawn to b6 to defend the pawn. And here we have to pause the video. You can pause the video and think of what will be your next move for the white pieces. And it's a move that wins the game. And this will be you can turn it into a puzzle. Take some time, pause the video, and look at the different lines. Okay? So hopefully you were able to find the move. But here you have to find this move. Queen takes d5. Brilliant move, right? Because the first thing that people see whenever it's this position, and by the way, that's the only move that turns everything into, it's made in 5 right now, but you just have to find that one move, because the majority of people here would just capture this rook and then capture this pawn. But if you capture the rook, okay, let me show you this one, because everybody goes for everybody says this one first right away. So you go for the rook here. But here you would think, oh, if they capture my rook, I can come with check or something and things like that. But here they don't have to capture the rook. Yeah, they're losing, but I would probably go with queen d6. And that's not a force mate anymore. I mean, you're winning, but you still have to play some chess, right? And what if you blunder something, you know, as per usual. So they don't have to capture back, okay? But to make it forceful, you have to find this move, queen takes d5. Brilliant move, and it's a check. And I hope you were able to find all 3 lines. There are like 3, 4, I don't remember how many lines, but there's a few lines. And all of them, and I think it's like 4 lines or so, in checkmate. It's forced checkmate from here. It depends on what they do. My opponent here in this game, they capture my queen, which makes it for the fastest checkmate. One of the fastest. Not the fastest. The fastest will be if they bring the king here to f8 and you just have checkmate in 1. But naturally, they would just capture the queen here. Now you have the captures here on the rook take c8 check. And remember that your knight is covering also the f7 square, which turns this into a background problem, right? So here they would have to give up the rook, and then that's just a checkmate here against the black pieces. So that's what happened in the game. But let's look at the few lines. Now we were seeing, okay, they cannot capture my queen. They cannot capture our queen. So if they go king f8, you just have checkmate in 1, right? If they just want to give away the queen, you just the same idea, right? But what happens if they go with king here to h8? Now you have a 4 sequence, which is the nicest, the smother mate. So here you have to find this move, knight f7 check. And you're doing like a royal fork, and very nice fork. Only move for the black pieces is to bring the king here to g8. And here you capture the queen, but it's not that you're capturing the queen, but it's more that you are going for the h6 square with your knight, because it's very important. So here you have to find this move, knight, it's a double check. So they cannot capture your knight because your queen is also giving a check, and they cannot capture your queen because the knight is also giving a check. So they cannot do one move to cover 2 things. In this position, they just have to move the king. If they move the king here to f8, again, you have the checkmate in 1 with the queen here on f7. But here, if they go with king h8, now you can sacrifice your queen, give away your queen, and the king cannot capture the queen because the knight is defending the g8 square. So they have to capture with the rook. And here you just smother the king here with knight f7 checkmate. All right. So hopefully you were able to see those different lines. And that's what made the sacrifice of the queen a brilliant move, because any of the lines, like none of the lines worked for them to defend, which makes it brilliant and unstoppable checkmate. So I hope you really liked this video. Again, like the video, comment on the video, subscribe, you can share it with your friends, things like that. Hopefully these videos, at least this game, gives you some ideas for your own games, right? So we need to take some time, you know, sometimes we need to like relax a little bit and try to calculate a little bit more if we have some extra time, you know. If we're not having much time to think about different positions and different lines and ideas, then maybe play a different time control that is a little bit slower, so you have some time to think about different moves and sequences And that's the thing about chess, right? We need to take some time to think. Okay, so I hope you liked the video, and I will see you on the next one.